The road had long since narrowed into a ribbon of gravel curling between walls of trees. The forest here seemed untouched, older than the cracked asphalt that had ended 2 miles back. Margaret Collins kept her hands steady on the steering wheel as her pickup climbed another bend, its tires crunching over stones slick from a recent rain. She hadn't seen another car in hours, only the wavering silhouettes of oaks and pines closing over her like a living tunnel. On the passenger seat lay a faded geological map folded to the corner of this forgotten county, and her old rock hammer wrapped in a cloth that still smelled faintly of iron and field dust. The realtor's paperwork sat beneath it, bearing a single signature and the unbelievable figure 100. The price of a decent dinner in San Francisco had bought her this place at the edge of nowhere. She was 50 now, or close enough that the number no longer mattered. Her hair, streaked with gray, was tied back in a way that was practical rather than elegant. Years of fieldwork had carved lines around her eyes, the kind that came from squinting against sun and sand, not from smiling. California had been her whole life, a comfortable house in Berkeley, a husband who taught engineering at the university, 2 children who had long since learned to build their own orbits far from home. But Thomas was gone, his sudden heart failure, a wound she still didn't understand how to name. The memory washed over her as it always did unbidden. Thomas had his desk glasses perched on his nose, working on some complex equation, then the sudden grimace, his hand clutching his chest, the glasses slipping the thud as he hit the floor. No warning, no chance to say goodbye, just the deafening silence that followed, filling every corner of their home. The children had been kind in that distracted way of grown offspring. Emails, calls, promises to visit, but lives too full to slow down. Jason, her oldest at 28, had called her decision to sell the house impulsive and concerning. Her colleagues at the university's geology department had been less kind. Midlife crisis, they whispered. Grief has finally caught up with her. She'd packed her instruments one morning and realized that every sound in her house came from machines. The refrigerator's hum, the heating system's sigh, the dishwasher's rhythmic pulse. No human voices, no footsteps, no laughter. The silence had become physical, pressing against her skin like an unwelcome touch. The advertisement had been brief. Historic property, remote, structurally sound, sold as is, 100. She thought it was a scam until the county clerk confirmed it. The location lay deep within an overgrown nature reserve, a relic from some abandoned post-war project. Her colleagues had laughed when she told them her plans. "You'll be eaten alive by mosquitoes before you find peace out there," Der Hendricks had said, not bothering to hide his smirk. Perhaps they were right, yet the thought of owning a place where the ground had not been mapped by anyone in half a century lit a spark in her she hadn't felt in years. And if she was honest, the price had its own poetry. $100 for a place where time itself had gone bankrupt. Her phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. Jason's name flashed on the screen. She connected it to the truck's speakers. "Mom, I've been trying to reach you for hours. Where are you?" The concern in his voice was edged with frustration, a tone she'd grown familiar with over the past year. "Almost there, the signal's getting spotty. I still can't believe you're going through with this. You're a respected scientist, not some hermit. Dad wouldn't want—" "Your father isn't here to want anything, Jason." The words came out sharper than she'd intended. "This is something I need to do. You could have at least waited until I could come with you. I don't like the idea of you out there alone. I've spent half my career alone in remote locations. I'll be fine." That was different. That was work. I don't know what this is. Neither did she, if she was being honest. But she knew she couldn't stay in that empty house another day surrounded by echoes. "I have to go. The road's getting rough and I need both hands. I'll call when I'm settled." "Mom." She ended the call, guilt and relief mingling in her chest. The road curved sharply upward, and as she rounded the final bend, the trees parted and the air brightened. Then she saw it, a 3-story white structure rising from the green like a dream left half-finished. It stood in a small clearing, surrounded by wild vines and fern. The walls were pale, but streaked with gray from years of neglect. Columns held up circular balconies on each level, and ivy spilled from the upper railings as if the house were slowly being reclaimed by the forest. It was beautiful in its symmetry, unsettling in its silence. She turned off the engine and sat for a moment, listening to the tick of the cooling motor. The hum of insects, the creak of branches, the faint dripping of water, somewhere unseen. No other sound. She could almost imagine the earth breathing beneath her tires. The key she had been mailed fit the heavy front door perfectly, though she doubted anyone had locked it in years. The hinges groaned when she pushed it open. Inside, the air was cool and damp, heavy with the scent of rot and old paper. Dust swirled through the light from the open door like pale smoke. The first room she entered had once been a hall, plaster peeled from the ceiling, but a grand staircase curved upward, still solid. There was no furniture except for a few broken wooden frames. On one wall, half covered by vines that had crept in through a cracked window, hung a large geological map printed in faded ink layers of terrain, mineral lines, pressure faults. It was the kind of map only a scientist would display as decoration. In the bottom corner was a handwritten note. Stevens Property Survey 1948. The name stirred something faint in her memory, though she couldn't place it. She spent the remaining daylight hours exploring carefully, one floor at a time. The circular corridors felt strange, almost ceremonial, wrapping around a central core. Each level had a wraparound balcony, as if designed for observing rather than living. The architecture seemed deliberate, purposeful, in a way she couldn't quite identify. Night fell quickly in the forest. Margaret set up a simple camp in what had once been the living room: sleeping bag, portable stove, battery-powered lantern. She boiled water for tea, the small blue flame flickering against the walls. The sound of boiling water mingled with the sighs of the forest beyond the windows. She was about to settle in for the night when she felt a subtle tremor beneath the floorboards, so faint she might have imagined it. But decades of field work had attuned her body to the earth's movements. This was real, a gentle pulse like the heartbeat of something buried. It lasted only a second, perhaps less, but it made her sit upright, senses suddenly alert. The tremor faded. The old house stood still once more. She marked it in her field notebook out of habit, noting the time and intensity. Sleep came fitfully, her dreams filled with shifting soil and luminous veins of rock pulsing beneath her feet. At dawn, mist hung low over the ground outside the broken windows. Dew clung to the ivy like silver threads. She brewed coffee on her camp stove and stood on the path that curved toward the forest, gazing up at the building that was now hers. In the slanting light, it looked less like a ruin and more like a sentinel, its balconies layered like watchtowers. She thought of Thomas, of how he would have laughed at her impulsiveness, then helped her anyway. He used to say, "You and the earth speak the same language. I just wish I could translate." She smiled faintly at the memory. Perhaps that was why she had come to remember that language. She unpacked her equipment, arranging her seismometer and portable temperature probe near where she'd felt the tremor. The ground here fascinated her, already warm, slightly damp, richer in sulfuric smell than she expected. When she pressed her palm against the soil near the foundation, she felt a residual heat, subtle but distinct. In a small study on the second floor, she found a rusted metal box wedged behind a fallen bookshelf. Inside were weathered notebooks bound in leather. On the first page, a name appeared again: Arthur Stevens, Field Notes, 1947, October, 1952. Her heart skipped slightly. She sat on the dusty floor, brushed away a dead moth, and began to read. The handwriting was compact, measured. The entries began mundanely: temperature logs, soil compositions, coordinates. But the tone shifted the further she read. Unusual thermal readings near central foundation. Pressure pockets increasing at irregular intervals. Later entries carried something more personal. The house is stable, but the ground is restless. At night I hear resonance through the columns, perhaps seismic, though I feel it more than hear it. The final page ended abruptly. If I am correct, the energy source lies directly beneath us. The structure must remain intact. Margaret closed the notebook slowly. The floor beneath her felt firm enough, though the words lodged in her mind. She looked around at the symmetry of the building, the columns, the central core. It did look engineered with purpose. Not just a house, but a design responding to forces beneath. She thought of the region's fault history, the minor geothermal vents recorded decades ago. Maybe Stevens had built this place to study them. Or maybe he'd gone mad. She had known scientists who crossed that thin line, lured by their own hypotheses, until the earth itself became an obsession. That night she couldn't sleep again. She lay awake listening to the settling of the old house, the occasional groan of timber adjusting to the cooling air. Then it happened again, that subtle tremor, slightly stronger, this time passing through the floorboards like a wavelength. She switched on her flashlight and pointed it at the floor. Between two warped planks, she caught a glimpse of something impossible. A faint blue glow pulsing up through the gap, steady as a heartbeat, then gone. She blinked, wondering if her eyes were playing tricks. But when she pressed her hand to the spot, the warmth was unmistakable. She pried up one of the loose floorboards, revealing the subfloor below. The blue light flickered again, seeping through hairline cracks in the foundation. She took temperature readings 7 degrees warmer than it should be. Her scientific mind raced with explanations, bioluminescent, fungi, chemical reactions from decaying materials, even instrumental error. But none of those explained the rhythmic nature of the light or the warmth that seemed to ebb and flow like breath. The next morning, she began a systematic examination of the house's foundation. The cellar entrance was hidden behind a rusted door off the kitchen. Stone steps spiraled down into darkness, the air growing noticeably warmer with each step. Her headlamp cut through the gloom, revealing walls lined with stone blocks, uneven but carefully arranged. The mortar between them had cracked in a spiderweb pattern. The floor was rough concrete with darker veins running across it like scars. Near one corner, the concrete had lifted as if swollen from pressure below. When she touched it, she felt a mild vibration, a steady pulse beneath her fingertips. Her instruments confirmed what she already suspected: the ground temperature here was nearly 7 degrees warmer than outside. She began logging measurements, noting the fluctuations in red ink in her field book. The scientist in her was fully awake now, shaking off grief like dust. Work was her way of praying, and the earth, as always, would answer in vibrations. The sound of tires on gravel jerked her attention from her readings. Someone was coming up the drive. She climbed the cellar stairs quickly and reached the front door just as a sleek black SUV pulled to a stop in front of the house. The vehicle looked jarringly modern against the wild backdrop of the forest. A tall man in his 40s stepped out, dressed in an expensive suit that seemed out of place in these surroundings. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his posture confident as he approached the house. Everything about him spoke of authority and resources. Dr. Collins. His voice was smooth, practiced. Victor Reed, Director of Research at Centron Energy. I hope I'm not intruding. Margaret stood in the doorway, suddenly conscious of her dusty clothes and disheveled hair. How did you know I was here? Reed smiled, the expression not quite reaching his eyes. Small county. Word travels when someone buys the old Stevens place, especially someone with your reputation in geological circles. He extended a business card. The logo showed a stylized flame embracing the earth. Centron is conducting a geological survey of this region for potential sustainable energy sources. We've detected some interesting patterns in this area. His gaze shifted briefly to the floor where Margaret had been taking readings. I was surprised to learn someone had purchased this property. It's been abandoned for decades. I like my privacy, Margaret said, not taking the card. Of course. Reed's smile remained fixed. I'm curious, though, have you noticed anything unusual about the property? Any ground anomalies, temperature fluctuations? The directness of this question sent a wave of suspicion through her. How would he know to ask about those specific phenomena? It's an old house, plenty of quirks. She kept her tone neutral. What exactly is Centron looking for in these woods, Mr. Reed? Please call me Victor. He glanced past her into the house. We're primarily interested in geothermal potential. This region has some unique subterranean features that could revolutionize clean energy production. This is a nature reserve. I'm surprised they're allowing energy exploration. Reed's smile tightened slightly. We have all the necessary permits. Sustainable energy benefits everyone, Dr. Collins. Margaret didn't return his smile. Something about Reed felt wrong, too polished, too convenient. I've only just arrived, haven't had time to notice much of anything. The lie came easily. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a lot of unpacking to do. Of course. Here's my card in case you do notice anything. Out of the ordinary. Centron compensates generously for access to promising sites. This time she took the card, if only to end the conversation more quickly. I'll keep that in mind. Reed nodded and turned to go, then paused. Dr. Collins, I should mention these old buildings aren't always as stable as they appear. If you need any structural assessment, Centron would be happy to provide them. Free of charge, of course. I'll manage. She watched as he drove away, the SUV disappearing around the bend. When she was sure he was gone, she went to her laptop and searched for information about Centron Energy. The company website featured glossy images of solar panels and wind turbines with bold claims about pioneering sustainable energy solutions. But deeper searches revealed a different picture. Environmental violations quietly settled indigenous land disputes, rumors of experiments that pushed ethical boundaries. They had begun as a small research firm 30 years ago, but had expanded rapidly after several military contracts. What struck her as odd was the specificity of Reed's questions. He hadn't come to inform her about a general survey. He'd come looking for something particular, something he thought might be under her house. Later that evening, as rain began to patter against the windows, Margaret expanded her search to include Arthur Stevens. Most results were academic papers from the late 1940s, standard geological surveys, nothing remarkable. But one archived newspaper clipping caught her eye, a small article from 1952 about the mysterious disappearance of government scientist. According to the article, Stevens had vanished without explanation, leaving behind a fully furnished home and unfinished research. The case had never been solved. The final line mentioned that a Dr. V. Reed of the Energy Department would be overseeing the handling of Stevens's classified research materials. Margaret scrolled back up to look at the grainy photograph included with the article. It showed Stevens standing outside what was clearly this house, newly built at the time. But what made her blood run cold was the man standing beside him, younger but unmistakably the same Victor Reed who had visited her today. A man who should be in his 90s by now, not the 40-something who had stood on her doorstep. She closed her laptop, slowly mind racing. It couldn't be the same person, perhaps a son or grandson, yet the resemblance was uncanny, and the interest in this specific property spanned decades. Rain drummed harder on the roof as night fell. Margaret tried to focus on organizing her equipment, but her thoughts kept returning to Reed's visit and Stevens's cryptic notes. The house creaked and settled around her, but beneath those familiar noises was something else, a low, steady hum almost below the threshold of hearing. She walked slowly around the ground floor, trying to locate the source. The vibration seemed stronger near the center of the house, directly above the spot in the cellar where she'd noticed the raised concrete. Just after midnight, a particularly violent thunderclap shook the windows. The floor beneath her feet trembled, not from the thunder, but from something deeper. The blue light she'd glimpsed earlier now seeped more visibly through several cracks in the floorboards, pulsing with increased intensity. Margaret grabbed her headlamp and descended quickly to the cellar. The warmth hit her immediately. The temperature had risen at least 3 degrees since her earlier visit. The concrete at the center of the floor had cracked further, and the blue glow emanated rhythmically from the fissures, casting eerie shadows on the stone walls. She approached cautiously, thermal sensor in hand. The reading spiked near the light source, 20 degrees above normal, and climbing. Whatever was generating this energy was becoming more active. Behind a collapsed shelf stacked with rusted tools, a section of the wall sounded hollow when she knocked. She tapped it again. The echo was unmistakable. Brushing away cobwebs, she found the faint outline of a metal door set into the stone. The hinges were rusted over and bricks had been piled against it deliberately. Written across the surface in faint chalk, barely legible, were the words, "Do not open. The house stands on her." Margaret stood motionless, the lamp beam trembling slightly with her breath. It might have been a warning or a superstition from whoever had lived here last. Still, she took photos, measurements, everything her training dictated. Yet she didn't touch the door again that day. Instead, she climbed back up into the light, feeling the air thicken as she moved. That evening, she opened another of Stevens' notebooks, the one she hadn't finished. The handwriting was sharp, hurried, different from the measured notes at the beginning. It described soil cores, heat signatures, and strange luminous reactions when pressure was applied to certain stones. One entry caught her attention. The layer glows under stress, not from heat alone. The lattice emits faint blue light like a living pulse. There is movement in the readings, rhythmic, could be geothermal, could be biological. The final pages carried a tone of fear. The pressure rises at night. The foundation stabilizes the flow. If the chamber fails, everything collapses. Must remain sealed. Margaret closed the book slowly. She remembered the warm boards, the trembling floor, the sense of breath beneath the house. It fit too well to ignore. She leaned back in her chair, watching her lamp's reflection in the window. Beyond it, darkness stretched into the forest, silent and impenetrable. The question was no longer whether the ground was active. It was why someone had built a home directly above it, and why Victor Reed, a man who should be dead or extremely elderly by now, was so interested in what lay beneath. Over the next few days, she worked tirelessly to restore what she could while keeping notes of every anomaly. She recorded temperature changes, measured vibrations, and compared them to Stevens's entries. The numbers aligned too closely for coincidence. She also tried researching Victor Reed, but found almost nothing beyond his current position at Centron. No personal history, no academic background, just professionally curated press releases and company statements. It was as if he had appeared fully formed at Centron 20 years ago. Her attempts to call Jason went straight to voicemail. The reception here was spotty at best, but she managed to get an email through to him, keeping it light, avoiding any mention of blue lights or mysterious visitors. Late one night, unable to resist any longer, she went back to the cellar. The chalked words on the metal door glowed faintly in her headlamp's light ghostly white. She cleared the remaining bricks and ran her fingers along the seam. Her heart pounded with a mixture of fear and curiosity that was familiar from her fieldwork days, the feeling that came before a significant discovery. The handle broke off with a dry snap when she tried to turn it, leaving a small opening through which warm air escaped. It smelled faintly of minerals and ozone, the scent of rain striking stone. It took her 2 days to fully pry the door open, unworking at the rusted hinges with tools she found in a shed behind the house. Behind the door lay a narrow stairwell, spiraling downward, carved directly into the rock. Every surface was damp, slick with condensation. As she descended, the air grew hotter and heavier, thick with the taste of metal. Her flashlight caught the glimmer of water running in thin rivulets down the walls. The stone steps were worn in the middle, as if many feet had traveled this path over time. The staircase ended in a small chamber no larger than a basement storage room. But the air inside vibrated softly as though filled with the low hum of machinery, though there were none visible. The walls were lined with what looked like copper mesh, embedded in the stone tarnished green with age. She moved the beam across the floor and froze. In the center lay a fissure perhaps a foot wide running diagonally through the stone. A dim blue glow leaked from within, steady and alive. Around it were the remains of old equipment, rusted tripods, glass tubes, shattered metal boxes half melted by heat. She crouched and extended her hand. The light pulsed faintly. Once, twice, almost like a slow heartbeat. When her fingertips hovered near, she felt warmth. Not dangerous, just conscious. For a long moment, she stayed kneeling, mesmerized by the faint luminescence dancing within the crack. It reminded her of the ocean's bioluminescence she had seen years ago off Monterey Bay, the way certain algae glowed when stirred by waves. But this was deeper, quieter, ancient. She imagined the planet itself exhaling through a fracture in its skin. Something on the far wall caught her attention, a series of equations and diagrams scratched directly into the stone. They were unlike any geological formulas she recognized, blending higher physics with what looked almost like biological notations. Beneath them, a single sentence had been carved more deeply, not dead but dreaming. A noise from above made her start, the creak of a floorboard, too deliberate to be the house settling. Someone was inside. She switched off her flashlight, plunging the chamber into darkness save for the blue glow from the fissure. Footsteps moved across the floor above methodical searching. Heart pounding as she eased back toward the stair, moving silently as possible. As she reached the base of the stairs, she heard the cellar door open. A beam of light cut through the darkness, sweeping across the walls. "Dr. Collins," Victor Reed's voice echoed in the damp space. "I know you're down here. We need to talk." She remained still, hoping the darkness would conceal her. How had he entered her house? What gave him the right to search her property? "I'm not here to harm you," Reed continued, his footsteps approaching the open metal door. "But you've discovered something you don't understand, something dangerous." The beam of his flashlight found the doorway to the hidden stairwell, then Margaret herself half crouched at the bottom step. The light blinded her momentarily. "There you are." His voice was calm, almost relieved. "Please, let's discuss this like scientists." "Scientists don't break into private property," Margaret said, shielding her eyes from the glare. "Leave now or I'm calling the sheriff." Reed chuckled. "With what phone, there's no signal for miles, as I'm sure you've discovered. And the nearest neighbor is the park ranger, who won't be back from vacation for another week." A chill ran through her that had nothing to do with the damp surroundings. He'd been watching her planning this confrontation. "What do you want?" She tried to keep her voice steady. "The same thing Arthur Stevens wanted. The same thing that's drawn people to this spot for centuries." He moved closer, the light lowering slightly. "Access to what's beneath this house." "You knew Stevens." It wasn't a question. "We worked together, yes. A brilliant mind, but ultimately too cautious. Too afraid of what we discovered. That photo in the newspaper, it was you. Not your father, not a relative. You." Margaret could hear the absurdity in her own words, but the evidence was before her. "That was 70 years ago. You should be an old man." Reed stepped fully into the doorway, now his silhouette framed by the faint blue glow behind Margaret. "The energy source below has many properties. Longevity is just one of them. Stevens called it the heartbeat of the world, poetic but not inaccurate. What we found here is the key to understanding Earth's own regenerative system. Margaret's scientific skepticism battled with the evidence of her senses. The unnatural light, the rhythmic pulse, this man who hadn't aged in 7 decades. You've been harvesting it somehow, taking it for yourself, studying it, using it. There's a difference. Reed's tone was that of a professor correcting a student, but the source is weakening. The original containment structure Stevens built is failing. That's why I need access to this chamber to stabilize it before it's too late. Too late for what? For your immortality treatment. Margaret felt anger rising through her fear. For everything. Reed gestured to the fissure behind her. That crack connects to a network that spans continents. If it ruptures here, the energy release would trigger reactions throughout the system. Think of it as a geological chain reaction. She didn't want to believe him, but her own instruments had shown the increasing instability. The temperature rising, the vibrations growing stronger. Whatever was happening beneath the house was accelerating. Why should I trust you? You broke into my home. Because I've been monitoring this site for decades. I know its patterns, its limits. For the first time, something like fear crept into Reed's voice. And we're approaching a threshold. The storm tonight will drop atmospheric pressure significantly. Combined with the already destabilized fissure, it could trigger a cascade failure. As if summoned by his words, thunder rolled overhead, closer and more insistent than before. The blue light behind Margaret pulsed more rapidly, its glow intensifying. What do you really want with it, not just to stabilize it? Margaret backed away from him, closer to the fissure. Centron has developed technology to harness this energy, safely distribute it. Imagine clean power for millions, regenerative medicine beyond our wildest dreams. Reed stepped down onto the first stair. The applications are limitless. And profitable. Progress and profit aren't mutually exclusive, Dr. Collins. His smile was cold, calculated. Stevens was too afraid to use what he'd found. He built this house as a suppression mechanism, not a research platform. That's why the energy is destabilizing. It was never meant to be caged indefinitely. Margaret glanced at the fissure, its light now casting their shadows in sharp relief against the walls. Something about Reed's explanation felt wrong and manipulative. If you truly wanted to help, you wouldn't have broken in. You would have been honest from the start. Would you have believed me about any of this? He gestured to the glowing crack. Sometimes truth requires demonstration. The house above them groaned as another thunderclap shook the forest. Dust sifted down from the ceiling, and the blue light flared suddenly bright enough to illuminate the entire chamber. Margaret could now see what surrounded the fissure clearly, not just broken equipment, but what looked like small shrines, offerings left by someone over time. Crystals, feathers, carved figures placed in a deliberate pattern around the light. Stevens wasn't just a scientist, Margaret realized aloud. He was trying to communicate with it, to understand it on its own terms. He went native, abandoned science for superstition. Reed's voice hardened. I don't have time for this. Centron's team will be here by morning with proper equipment. Step aside, Dr. Collins. This is my property. You have no right. I have every right. He pulled out a document from his jacket. Emergency Geological Assessment Order, signed by the county commissioner. This area has been designated a potential hazard zone requiring immediate expert intervention. The paper looked official, stamped and signed. How long had he been planning this? How many officials had Centron paid off? You can't just take over my home. The house was never meant to be a home. It's a containment structure built for a specific purpose. Reed checked his watch. The storm is intensifying. I need to take initial readings before my team arrives. He moved toward her with the confidence of someone used to getting his way. But as he approached the fissure, something strange happened. The blue light dimmed, suddenly pulsing in an erratic pattern. The temperature in the room dropped noticeably. Reed froze, his expression, changing from confidence to concern. That's not right. He pulled a small device from his pocket and aimed it at the fissure. The energy signature is shifting. It shouldn't do that. Margaret felt it too, a change in the vibration beneath her feet, like a living thing recoiling. Without fully understanding why, she stepped between Reed and the fissure. I think it's responding to you, and not positively. Don't be absurd, it's not sentient. But the uncertainty in his voice betrayed him. Are you sure about that? Stevens' notes suggested otherwise. Margaret was thinking aloud now, connecting pieces. He wrote about rhythmic patterns, responses to stimuli. What if it's not just energy? What if it's something more? Reed's face hardened. Step aside, Dr. Collins. I won't ask again. Above them, the storm unleashed its full fury. Rain hammered against the house and wind howled through the broken windows. The entire structure seemed to shudder under the onslaught. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the chamber, not thunder but the sound of wood splitting. Part of the ceiling gave way, sending debris crashing down between them. Margaret dove backward, narrowly avoiding being crushed. When the dust cleared, a barrier of broken timbers and stones separated her from Reed. "Collins." His voice was muffled by the debris. "We need to leave now. The house is becoming unstable." She knew he was right. Whatever was happening between the storm and the energy beneath was accelerating the deterioration of the structure. She needed to get out, regroup, figure out what to do next. As she turned to find another way out, her headlamp illuminated something she hadn't noticed before: a small alcove carved into the wall beside the fissure. Inside was a metal box, modern and incongruous among the ancient stone. It was secured with a simple combination lock. On a hunch, she tried the date from Stephen's last journal entry, 10/15/52. The lock clicked open. Inside was a single USB drive and a handwritten note. "If you're reading this, the house has chosen you too. What sleeps below must never be awakened. Reed knows only half the truth." The handwriting wasn't Stephen's, it was newer. And at the bottom was a signature she recognized instantly: Thomas Collins, her husband's name, dated just 3 years ago. The implications hit her like a physical blow. Thomas had been here. He had known about this place, about what lay beneath it, and he had never told her. The blue light from the fissure pulsed once strongly, as if responding to her shock and confusion. The ground beneath her feet trembled, and she knew with sudden certainty that she needed to leave immediately. She pocketed the USB drive and note, then searched frantically for a way out. The main stairwell was blocked by the collapse, but there had to be another exit. Stevens wouldn't have built a chamber with only one way in or out. Behind what she had thought was a collection of broken equipment, she found it a narrow tunnel reinforced with old timber leading away from the fissure at a sharp angle. Without hesitation, she crawled inside, the blue light fading behind her as she pushed deeper into the earth. The tunnel was tight but navigable and thankfully short. It emerged in the woods about 50 yards from the house, hidden by a trapdoor covered in years of fallen leaves. As she pulled herself out into the rain, she looked back at the house just in time to see one of the upper balconies collapse, the timber crashing through the roof below. Reed was nowhere to be seen. Had he made it out? Was he still trapped inside? Despite everything, she found herself hoping he had escaped. The questions he could answer were too important. She made her way to her truck, rain soaking her to the skin within seconds. The storm had intensified beyond any normal weather pattern, lightning striking continuously around the clearing, thunder so loud it felt like physical pressure against her eardrums. As she reached for the door handle, a hand grabbed her shoulder. She whirled around to find Reed, his perfect suit soaked and torn, a cut bleeding above his eye. "Give me the drive, Collins." His voice was barely audible over the storm. "How do you know Thomas?" she demanded, backing away. "What did you involve my husband in?" A strange expression crossed Reed's face, something almost like pity. "He found us, not the other way around. Thomas was brilliant, but he didn't understand what he was dealing with, just like Stevens. And you do, better than anyone alive." Lightning illuminated his face, highlighting a hunger in his eyes that had nothing to do with scientific curiosity. "That energy source has sustained me for decades. It can do the same for you." "At what cost?" Margaret clutched the drive tightly. Stevens believed it was alive, that it needed protection, not exploitation. Stevens was a fool who got cold feet when he glimpsed something beyond his comprehension. Reed's patience was clearly wearing thin. The storm is destabilizing the containment structure. If we don't act now, the energy will dissipate, lost forever. Or maybe it'll finally be free from people like you. Reed lunged for her, but another lightning strike hit terrifyingly close, the thunder immediate and deafening. They both staggered from the concussive force. When Margaret regained her balance, she saw something that defied explanation. Thin tendrils of blue light snaking up through the ground around the house, pulsing with the same rhythm she'd observed in the fissure. The entire clearing seemed to be breathing, the earth itself rising and falling subtly with each pulse. Reed's expression transformed to one of awe and terror. "It's breaking containment." After all these years, Margaret didn't wait to hear more. She yanked open her truck door and climbed inside, locking it behind her. The engine roared to life and she reversed down the driveway, tires spinning in the mud. In her rear-view mirror, she saw Reed standing motionless in the clearing, blue light rising around him as the house began to collapse inward, floor by floor. The last glimpse she caught before the trees obscured her view was of Reed reaching down toward one of the light tendrils, his face illuminated with an almost religious ecstasy. She drove through the storm on instinct alone, wipers barely keeping pace with the downpour, the truck hydroplaning on the flooded gravel road. Her mind raced faster than the vehicle. Thomas had known about this place had left her a message he somehow knew she would find. What connection did he have to Stevens, to Reed, to whatever was awakening beneath her property? The USB drive felt impossibly heavy in her pocket. Whatever answers it contained would have to wait until she reached safety. For now, she focused on the road, on putting distance between herself and that pulsing blue light. But even as the miles increased, she couldn't escape the feeling that something fundamental had changed. The rhythmic vibration she'd felt beneath the house seemed to have transferred into her own bones, a resonance that whispered of ancient forces and unimaginable power. And deeper still was the unsettling certainty that whatever had been sleeping beneath her house was now awake, and it knew her name. The rain had softened to a steady drizzle by the time Margaret reached the outskirts of Pinewood, the nearest town to her property. Her hands still trembled on the steering wheel, knuckles white with tension. The digital clock on her dashboard read 3:17 a.m., yet several storefronts glowed with light: a 24-hour diner, a gas station, a small motel with a flickering neon vacancy sign. She pulled into the motel parking lot, cut the engine, and sat in silence, listening to the tap of raindrops on the roof. The events at the house replayed in her mind with hallucinatory clarity: the pulsing blue light, Reed's unnatural youth, the collapsed balcony, and most disturbing of all, Thomas's name signed at the bottom of that note. Her husband, her rational, pragmatic husband, had somehow been involved in whatever lay beneath that house, and he had never breathed a word of it to her. The motel room smelled of industrial cleaner and cigarettes poorly masked by air freshener. Margaret placed her laptop on the small desk and plugged in the USB drive with unsteady fingers. A single folder appeared labeled simply Echo. Inside were dozens of files, research papers, photographs, video clips, and a document titled For Margaret Doc. She opened it first. The timestamp showed it had been created 3 months before Thomas died. Margaret, if you're reading this, I've either told you everything or I'm gone. I hope it's the former. What I've discovered defies conventional science, a geobiological entity that exists in a network beneath the Earth's crust. The government classified it as Project Echo in the 40s, but indigenous people have known about it for millennia. Centron Energy has been exploiting one of the network nodes for decades, siphoning energy without understanding the consequences. The man calling himself Victor Reed isn't human, not anymore. Be careful. Trust the house. It was built to protect, not contain. Margaret pressed her fingers to her lips, holding back a sound between a laugh and a sob. Even in writing about something impossible. Thomas's voice was unmistakable, precise, methodical, slightly formal. She could almost hear him dictating the words while pacing their living room the way he did when working through a complex problem. The rest of the files painted an increasingly bizarre picture. Project Echo had begun as a government initiative to investigate geothermal anomalies after World War II, led by Arthur Stevens. What they found beneath the future site of Margaret's house wasn't merely a heat source, but something that exhibited seemingly impossible properties: self-regulation, responsiveness to stimuli, even primitive communication through electromagnetic pulses. Most disturbing were the classified reports of biological integration events. Early researchers who made direct contact with the energy source underwent rapid cellular transformation. Many died. A few, like Reed, survived but changed. Enhanced longevity, heightened intelligence, but also increasingly sociopathic behavior and an addiction-like dependence on continued exposure. The government had officially shut down the project in 1952 when 3 scientists died in a containment breach. Stevens had convinced his superiors that the only safe approach was to build a structure that would stabilize the energy without attempting to harness it. Thus, the house was born, designed not as a home but as a sophisticated pressure regulator, using its symmetrical architecture and strategic weight distribution to keep the entity beneath in a dormant state. But Centron, a private company formed by former Project Echo scientists, including Reed, had continued secret research. Their goal wasn't containment but controlled extraction. They believed they could siphon the energy without awakening the entity, using it for everything from weapons development to life extension treatments for the wealthy and powerful. The final document was a satellite image dated just 6 weeks ago, showing thermal anomalies across North America. Points of blue light formed a web-like pattern beneath the continent, with Margaret's property sitting at a crucial nexus. Thomas had scrawled across the bottom, "The network is waking up." Stevens was right. As dawn broke, Margaret finally closed her laptop. She pressed her palms against her tired eyes, mind racing with implications. Her phone chimed with an incoming email, the first signal she'd had since arriving at the motel. It was from Emma Gardner, the journalist whose name had appeared in several of Thomas's files. "Dr. Collins, we need to meet. Your husband contacted me before his death. I have information about Stevens and Reed that wasn't safe to put in digital form. Can you come to Miller's Diner in Pinewood at 9 a.m.? Look for the woman in the red jacket." Margaret checked her watch, barely enough time for a shower. She hesitated only briefly before responding with a simple, "I'll be there." Miller's Diner sat on the corner of Pinewood's main street, its chrome and neon facade a throwback to the 1950s. Through the window, Margaret spotted a young woman in a scarlet blazer sitting in a corner booth, laptop open, dark hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. Emma Gardner looked younger than Margaret had expected, mid-30s at most, but her expression carried the wary intensity of someone who had seen too much. Emma slid a manila envelope across the table as Margaret settled into the booth. "These belong to your husband. He mailed them to me 3 days before he died with instructions to investigate if anything happened to him." Inside the envelope were photocopies of handwritten notes, unmistakably Thomas's cramped script, detailing his discovery of Project Echo through academic back channels. He had been researching renewable energy models when he stumbled upon references to Stevens' work. What began as academic curiosity had evolved into obsession as he uncovered the connection between Centron and the decades-old government project. "Your husband believed his heart attack wasn't natural." Emma's voice dropped to just above a whisper. "He told me Reed had threatened him when he started asking questions about the house. That's why I reached out when I saw you had purchased the property. I didn't expect you to actually move in." Margaret's coffee turned bitter in her mouth. "You think Reed had something to do with Thomas's death?" "I think Reed isn't someone who tolerates interference. Did you see it under the house?" Before Margaret could answer, the diner's television switched to breaking news. The reporter's voice cut through the breakfast chatter. "Authorities are investigating what they're calling a localized seismic event in the Pinewood Nature Reserve early this morning. Satellite imagery shows what appears to be a sinkhole where an abandoned property once stood. Officials are warning residents to avoid the area due to potential ground instability." The screen showed aerial footage of what remained of Margaret's house, a collapsed ruin at the center of a perfect circle of disturbed earth. Blue light no longer pulsed visibly, but the surrounding trees leaned inward as if drawn toward the center by some invisible force. "That's not a sinkhole." Margaret's voice sounded distant to her own ears. Emma stared at the screen, her face pale. "We need to go somewhere private, now." They relocated to Emma's rental car parked behind the diner. Emma pulled out a tablet and brought up documents too sensitive to risk on public networks: internal Centron, memo satellite thermal imaging, and geological surveys spanning decades. Centron isn't just an energy company. They're a cult disguised as a corporation. Reed is their leader, though he operates behind a board of directors for public purposes. They believe the energy network is divine, the literal lifeblood of the planet, and that by bonding with it, they can evolve beyond human limitations. The memos detailed experiments conducted on volunteers at private Centron facilities. Most subjects died, a few transformed in unpredictable ways, some developing extraordinary abilities, others degenerating into something no longer recognizably human. Reed is the only one who achieved stable integration. He's their proof of concept, their messiah. But according to your husband's research, even Reed isn't stable anymore. He needs regular exposure to maintain his condition, like a junkie needing a fix. And the house was containing the purest source. Margaret thought of Reed standing in the rain as blue light spiraled around him, his face transfixed with religious ecstasy. He's there now, at what's left of the property. Then we need to move quickly. Centron will have their security forces securing the area within hours. Whatever was released when the house collapsed, they'll want to control it, contain it, study it. We can't fight a corporation with private security. We need authorities involved. Emma's laugh held no humor. Centron has half the county officials on payroll. Any report we file will go straight to Reed. No, we need irrefutable evidence, something too big for them to bury. Margaret's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mom, it's Jason. Got your email. Flying in. Land at 2 p.m. at Pinewood Regional. Call me. She hadn't emailed Jason. Someone had accessed her account. It's Reed, Margaret showed Emma the message. He's using my son to draw me out. Emma's expression hardened. Or your son is actually coming and Reed knows it. Either way, we can't trust digital communications. Centron has capabilities beyond normal corporate surveillance. I need to warn Jason, tell him to stay away. If you call the number, you'll confirm your location. We need to assume they're tracking your phone, your credit cards, everything. Margaret thought of her son walking into a trap of Reed using him as leverage. She couldn't risk it. Then we go to the airport. If it's really Jason, we intercept him before Centron can. If it's a trap, at least we're on public ground. It's exactly what they'll expect. Then we don't go empty-handed. Margaret pulled up the files from Thomas's USB drive. We bring all of this, the Project Echo documentation, the evidence of Centron's experiments, Thomas's notes about Reed, enough to make it too risky for them to move against us openly. Emma considered this, then nodded slowly. Insurance. Not perfect, but it might buy us room to maneuver. We should split the evidence between us in case one of us is caught. They spent the next hours creating duplicate copies, separating the most damning documents into two sets. Margaret found herself studying a photograph from 1952. Scientists gathered around what appeared to be the fissure, its blue light illuminating their awestruck faces. Stephen stood to the side, his expression concerned rather than triumphant. And there was Reed looking exactly as he had yesterday, not a day older after 7 decades. What kind of energy could halt aging? What would a man do to maintain access to such a fountain of youth? The answer seemed clear in the trail of bodies, both literal and corporate, that Centron had left in its wake. By early afternoon, they had positioned themselves near the small airport's arrival area. Margaret had purchased new clothes and a prepaid phone, leaving her original phone in the motel room, still transmitting location data. She felt exposed despite these precautions, scanning each face for signs of recognition or intent. When passengers from Jason's flight began to emerge, Margaret's heart hammered against her ribs. Then she saw him tall, like his father, moving with the same slight stoop from too many hours bent over computers. The relief washed through her quickly, followed by renewed fear. Jason was really here, which meant he was now in danger too. She intercepted him before he reached the main terminal, pulling him aside with urgency that startled him. Jason's forehead creased with concern. Mom, what's going on? You look... We need to leave now. I'll explain everything, but we can't stay here. Margaret guided him toward the exit where Emma waited with the car. Is this about the house? I saw something on the news about a sinkhole in the nature reserve. Is that why you emailed asking me to come? Margaret froze. I didn't email you. Understanding dawned in Jason's eyes, followed by alarm. Someone sent a message from your account last night. It said you'd discovered something in the house that related to Dad's research, that you needed help. We need to move. Emma appeared at Margaret's elbow, voice tight with urgency. Security cameras just repositioned to track us. They hurried to the parking lot, Margaret briefing Jason in terse sentences. His initial skepticism gave way to grim acceptance as Emma pulled onto the highway, constantly checking the rearview mirror for signs of pursuit. Dad never mentioned any of this. Jason scrolled through the files on Margaret's laptop, face pale in the blue glow of the screen. A secret government project, energy entities, biological transformation. It doesn't sound like him at all. He was protecting us. Margaret watched the forest thicken on either side of the highway. The question is, what did he find that made Reed target him? Maybe he found a way to neutralize the energy source. Emma merged onto a less-traveled road, gravel crunching beneath the tires. If Reed depends on it to maintain his condition, that would be an existential threat. Jason shook his head. Or maybe Dad found a way to stabilize the integration process. Make it safe for normal people, not just Reed and his inner circle. That would threaten Centron's entire power structure. Margaret considered both possibilities. Neither explained why Thomas had kept his research secret from her, why he had never shared the burden of this knowledge. They had always been partners in everything from raising children to academic collaboration. This silence felt like a betrayal, however well-intentioned. Emma turned onto a narrow dirt track that wound deeper into the forest. We can't stay in town. Centron will have people watching, hotels, rental agencies, everything. I have a friend who owns a cabin about 20 miles from here. It's off-grid, no digital footprint. The cabin proved to be little more than a hunter's shack, one room with a wood stove, an outhouse behind, and a generator for minimal electricity. But it had a solid table where they could spread their documents and thick curtains to prevent any light from escaping at night. They worked through the evidence systematically, piecing together the fragmented history of Project Echo and Centron's subsequent exploitation. Thomas's notes became increasingly agitated in his final entries, his normally precise handwriting growing erratic. He discovered something that changed everything. Jason pointed to the final page. Look at this calculation. He was mapping the energy network, predicting some kind of system-wide awakening. Margaret examined the formula. Thomas had been tracking temperature increases across the network, modeling a pattern of activation that accelerated with each node that became active. According to his projections, once a critical number of nodes awakened, the entire system would surge with activity, creating what he termed a coherence event. What happens during this coherence event? Margaret wondered aloud. Emma pulled up thermal satellite imagery showing the blue network pulsing beneath the continent. According to indigenous stories, it happened once before thousands of years ago. They called it the time when the Earth spoke. Geological records show massive tectonic shifts during that period, but also unprecedented evolutionary leaps in certain species. You're suggesting this network is responsible for evolutionary jumps. Jason's scientific skepticism was evident in his tone. I'm suggesting there's a connection between this energy and life itself, and Reed has been tapping into it, distorting it for decades. Your father believed the network was responding to that distortion, waking up to protect itself. Margaret remembered the way the blue light had recoiled from Reed in the chamber, how it had pulsed differently in his presence. It's not just an energy. Stevens knew it. He wrote that it was alive, somehow conscious. That's why he built the house. Jason snapped his fingers, excitement overtaking caution. Not to contain it, but to give it space to exist without human interference. The house wasn't a prison, it was a sanctuary. Their theorizing was interrupted by the sound of vehicles approaching, multiple engines moving slowly along the dirt road. Emma doused the lights immediately. Centron, they must have tracked us somehow. Margaret moved to the window, peering through a gap in the curtains. Headlights cut through the evening gloom, 3 black SUVs identical to the one Reed had driven to her house. They stopped 100 yards from the cabin, disgorging figures in tactical gear. There's no back door. Jason's voice was steady despite the fear evident in his eyes. Emma pulled up floorboards beneath the table, revealing a narrow crawl space. Maintenance access to the plumbing. It connects to a drainage pipe that leads to the creek. It'll be tight, but we can make it. Margaret gathered the most crucial documents, stuffing them into her jacket. They can't find this research. If Reed knows how much we've pieced together. They didn't finish the sentence. They didn't need to. The escape was claustrophobic and filthy, a tight concrete pipe barely wide enough for an adult to shimmy through on elbows and knees. Margaret fought against rising panic as she inched forward in absolute darkness, the sound of her own breathing deafening in the confined space. Behind her, Jason and Emma moved with similar, desperate quiet. They emerged into the creek bed a quarter-mile from the cabin, soaked and mud-covered, but free. Through the trees, they could see flashlight beams sweeping the cabin interior. They had escaped with minutes to spare. We need transportation. Emma's teeth chattered from cold and adrenaline. There's a ranger station 2 miles north. Margaret oriented herself using the stars, a skill from her fieldwork days. They'll have vehicles, radio communication. They moved through the forest as quickly as they dared, keeping the creek between themselves and the cabin. Margaret's mind raced through scenarios, contingency plans. They needed to reach authorities beyond Centron's influence, federal agencies perhaps, or established media outlets that couldn't be silenced. Jason stopped abruptly, raising a hand for silence. Through the trees ahead, a faint blue glow pulsed, the same distinctive light they had fled from at the house. Another node. Margaret's whisper fogged in the cooling night air. The light emanated from what appeared to be a small cave entrance, partially hidden by undergrowth. The pulse matched what Margaret had observed beneath her house, steady, rhythmic, almost like breathing. The network really does spread everywhere. Emma moved closer, mesmerized by the glow. We should keep moving. Jason glanced back toward the cabin. Centron will expand their search when they realize we escaped. Margaret stepped toward the bar, drawn by scientific curiosity, and something deeper, a sense of recognition. The energy had responded to her before, had perhaps even protected her from Reed. I need to see it, just for a moment. The cave opening was narrow but navigable. Inside, the blue light danced across crystalline formations that lined the walls. At the center of the chamber, a small fissure no wider than Margaret's hand emitted the now familiar glow. Unlike the larger node beneath her house, this one felt calm, steady in its pulsation. Margaret approached slowly, hand extended, as if greeting a wild animal. The light brightened slightly, its rhythm accelerating to match her heartbeat. She felt a warmth spread up her arm, not unpleasant, but deeply unfamiliar. A tingling sensation that reminded her of the static electricity experiments she'd performed with students. It's responding to you. Emma's voice was hushed with wonder. Before Margaret could reply, a sharp crack echoed from outside, a gunshot followed by shouting voices. Centron's security team had found them. Back exit, please tell me caves have back exits. Jason's eyes darted frantically around the chamber. The blue light pulsed more rapidly, almost urgently. Margaret felt a gentle tug, an invitation toward the rear of the cave where the glow seemed to intensify. This way, and they followed the light deeper into the earth, the passage narrowing until they had to proceed single file. The voices behind them grew louder, flashlight beams bouncing off crystal formations. The blue light led them to what appeared to be a dead end, a solid wall of rock face. No, no, no. Jason pressed his palms against the stone, searching for cracks or openings. Margaret placed her hand on the rock wall. The blue light surrounded her fingers, seeping into the stone itself. Beneath her touch, the wall grew warm, then yielded, not crumbling, but somehow becoming permeable, like membrane rather than mineral. It's showing us the way. Margaret pushed forward, the stone parting around her hand like heavy curtains. They slipped through the impossible opening one by one, emerging onto a ledge overlooking a ravine. Below, a river caught moonlight in silver ripples. Behind them, the rock face solidified, once more sealing the passage they had used. That's not scientifically possible. Jason stared at the solid rock face, pale in the moonlight. Neither is a 70-year-old man who looks 40. Margaret gazed at the sealed passage with newfound understanding. The energy doesn't just exist within our reality, it can manipulate it. Emma pointed to a narrow trail leading down to the riverbank. We can follow the water to the highway, less chance of leaving tracks. As they picked their way carefully down the rocky path, Margaret's mind whirled with implications. The network had helped them escape. It had responded to her presence, had perhaps even chosen her as Thomas's note suggested. But for what purpose? The river led them to a service road where miraculously a park ranger's truck sat unattended, keys dangling from the ignition. Another coincidence that felt less like luck and more like orchestration. They drove in tense silence until they reached the highway, constantly scanning for Centron vehicles. We need somewhere with people, cameras, witnesses. Emma gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles. Somewhere Reed can't simply make us disappear. The university. Jason leaned forward from the back seat. Dad's old department. His colleagues knew his work, respected him. If we show them these files, explain what's happening, academic bureaucracy would take too long. Margaret shook her head. We need immediate action, protection. I have contacts at the Tribune. Emma merged onto the highway heading east. Journalists with enough clout that silencing them would raise too many questions. If we can get this evidence to them, create public pressure. A blue SUV appeared in the rearview mirror, closing distance rapidly. Then another joined it from a side road. They found us. Jason twisted to look out the rear window. How do they keep tracking us? The answer hit Margaret with sudden clarity. She yanked off her jacket, turning out the pockets. There, sewn into the lining, was a small device, no bigger than a button, a tracker planted while she slept at the motel, or perhaps even earlier. Emma accelerated, pushing the ranger's truck to its limits. We can't outrun those vehicles. We need to disappear. No, Margaret clutched the documents they'd salvaged. We need to make sure this information survives, even if we don't. We split up. Different destinations. They can't follow all of us. They formulated a hasty plan. At the next exit, they would abandon the truck at a busy truck stop. Emma would take half the evidence and head for her newspaper contacts in the city. Jason would take digital copies and seek out Thomas's most trusted colleague at the university. Margaret would keep the originals and create a diversion drawing Centron's attention while the others escaped. The truck stop loomed ahead, its neon signs, a beacon in the darkness. Emma pulled in sharply, parking between two semi-trucks to momentarily shield them from view. If anything happens to any of us, the others release everything immediately. Margaret divided the documents with quick efficiency. No waiting, no negotiating with Reed. They embraced briefly, fear making the moment raw and urgent. Then they scattered, Emma toward a Greyhound bus just preparing to depart, Jason toward the taxi stand, and Margaret toward the attached motel. She had taken no more than 20 steps when a black SUV screeched into the parking lot, cutting off her path to the motel. Victor Reed stepped out, immaculate as ever, despite the late hour. "Dr. Collins," his voice carried easily across the asphalt. "Enough running, we need to talk." Margaret backed away, scanning for escape routes. Reed advanced slowly, hands spread in a gesture of false reassurance. "Your companions have already been intercepted. This doesn't have to become unpleasant." A lie, Margaret was certain. Jason and Emma had too much of a head start, but she needed to maintain Reed's focus on her. "What happens to you at the house?" She kept moving backwards, circling toward the busier part of the truck stop. "I saw the blue lights surrounding you." Something flickered across Reed's perfect features, pain, or perhaps ecstasy in remembrance. "Communion. What Stevens feared, what your husband tried to prevent. The awakening has begun, Margaret. The entity recognizes me now as its voice in this world. You look different." And he did. His skin had a subtle luminosity, his eyes reflecting light in a way that wasn't quite human. "The integration isn't stable, is it?" Stevens knew the risks. That's why he built the house, to prevent direct contact. Reed's smile tightened. Stevens lacked vision. He wanted to study the energy from a distance, maintain separation. "I understood that true evolution requires merger symbiosis." "And how many people died during your experiments? How many test subjects didn't achieve your perfect symbiosis?" "Casualties of progress." Reed took another step forward, close enough now that Margaret could see faint blue veins pulsing beneath his skin. "But now I understand the missing element. The network doesn't just need access points, it needs conductors, human intermediaries. Special people like me, and possibly you." "Me," Margaret continued her careful retreat, moving toward a group of truckers gathered near the diner entrance. "The entity responded to you in the chamber. Stevens theorized that certain genetic markers made some people more compatible with the energy. Your husband confirmed it. Why do you think he never told you about Project Echo? He was protecting you from me, yes, but also from your own potential." The revelation struck Margaret like a physical blow. Thomas had known she was compatible with the energy, had feared what that might mean if Reed ever discovered her. "Whatever you're planning, it won't work. The evidence is already being distributed. Centron will be exposed." Reed laughed, the sound unnaturally melodic. "Centron is a shell, a temporary vehicle for a greater purpose. Its exposure would be inconvenient, but hardly terminal." He lunged suddenly, inhumanly fast, grabbing Margaret's arm before she could react. His touch sent a jolt through her system, not pain, but a disorienting surge of sensation, as if her nervous system had been briefly rewired. Images flashed behind her eyes, the blue network spanning continents, pulsing in unison. Ancient civilizations building structures atop energy nodes. Reed standing at the center of it all, channeling power through human conduits arranged in concentric circles. She wrenched away, gasping. "You're insane." "I'm evolved." Reed's eyes now glowed with the same blue light from beneath the house. "And soon you will be too. The entity has chosen us, Margaret. It's been waiting for minds capable of comprehending its purpose." Two Centron security personnel appeared behind Reed, moving to flank Margaret. She backed against a parked truck, trapped. "What purpose?" Margaret played for time, scanning desperately for escape routes. "Advancement. The entity accelerates evolution in its chosen vessels. It's happened before: the sudden emergence of consciousnesses in early hominids, the rapid development of human civilization, all guided by the network beneath our feet. And now it's chosen you as its prophet. How convenient." Reed's expression hardened. "Mock if you must, but you've felt it too. The connection, the recognition. It knows you, Margaret, just as it knows me." The truth was, she had felt something in the cave when the light had guided them to safety, and earlier beneath her house. a sense of communication without words of recognition beyond rational explanation. But whatever the entity was, she doubted its purpose aligned with Reed's megalomaniacal vision. If this entity is truly conscious, truly ancient, why would it choose someone who spent decades exploiting it, harvesting it for personal gain? Uncertainty flickered across Reed's face, quickly replaced by conviction. I've dedicated my life to understanding it. The harvesting was necessary. Research requires resources, and resources require power influence. You're not its partner. You're its parasite. Reed's composure cracked. Blue light flared beneath his skin veins, illuminating like circuitry. Enough. You're coming with us. Your son and the journalist will be found soon enough. The security personnel moved forward, reaching for Margaret. A flash of blue, subtle, almost imperceptible, rippled through the asphalt beneath their feet. Both men stumbled, as if the ground had shifted specifically under them. Reed's eyes widened in surprise. Margaret felt it too, a familiar warmth spreading up from the ground through her body. The network was here beneath the truck stop. It was everywhere, watching, aware. And somehow it was responding to her distress. It's not your ally. Margaret's certainty grew with each passing second. Whatever communion you think you've achieved, it's not what you believe. Reed snarled, lunging toward her again. This time the blue flash was unmistakable, a pulse of energy that surged between them, throwing Reed backward. He landed hard against the SUV, genuine shock registering on his face. This isn't possible. I am its chosen vessel. Margaret felt the energy flowing through her now, not invasive, but supportive, like a current she could direct. Maybe it chose you once, but things change. Maybe it's learned what you really are. The asphalt beneath Reed began to soften, blue light seeping through cracks that spread like spiderwebs around him. His security personnel backed away in alarm as the light intensified. Reed's confident facade dissolved into panic. Stop this! You don't understand what you're doing. But Margaret wasn't doing anything consciously. She was merely the conduit for something older, something that had finally recognized a threat to its existence. The cracks widened, and Reed began to sink, blue energy crawling up his legs, enveloping him. Margaret, please. Real fear now, his voice cracking. The integration is unstable. If the network rejects me now, after all these years, she felt no satisfaction at his terror, only a grim certainty that balance was being restored. This wasn't her revenge for Thomas or justice for Stevens. This was something more primal, the earth protecting itself from corruption. Reed screamed as the blue energy engulfed him completely. For one impossible moment that he was suspended in a cocoon of light, his body visibly changing, age catching up with him in seconds. Decades of artificially halted time and collapsing inward. Then the light contracted violently, pulling him downward. The asphalt sealed above him as if he had never been there. The security personnel fled, abandoning their vehicle in terror. Around the truck stop, no one else seemed to have noticed the impossible event, as if the energy had somehow shielded the confrontation from ordinary perception. Margaret stood alone in the parking lot, heart hammering against her ribs. The warmth receded gradually, leaving her cold and shaking with reaction. What had just happened defied scientific explanation. The network had protected her, had removed Reed with surgical precision. But why, and what did it mean for her now? Her phone vibrated in her pocket. The prepaid one, not the tracked device she'd abandoned. A text from Jason. Safe at university. Emma made contact with press. Where are you? Before she could reply, a second message appeared. GPS coordinates embedded. Meet us here. Bringing someone who knew Dad's work. The final piece of Thomas's puzzle was within reach. Whatever answers awaited, whatever truth lay behind the network's apparent sentience, Margaret would face it head-on. She had been a scientist her entire life, devoted to understanding the Earth's secrets. Now those secrets were reaching back, communicating in their own mysterious language. As she walked toward the taxi stand, Margaret felt the subtle pulse beneath her feet, the heartbeat of something vast and ancient, awakening after centuries of slumber. And this time she welcomed it. The university campus spread before Margaret as the taxi pulled away, its Gothic architecture stark against the pre-dawn sky. Light glowed from scattered windows, the ever-burning lamps of academia, where research never truly ceased. She checked the coordinates Jason had sent, which led to the Earth Sciences Building, where Thomas had once spent countless hours developing renewable energy models. The events at the truck stop replayed in her mind, Reed sinking into blue light, his body aging decades and seconds. She had witnessed something beyond scientific explanation, had somehow participated in it. The warmth still lingered in her fingertips, a phantom connection to the network that had protected her. She found Jason in the basement laboratory, huddled over computer screens, with an older man whose white beard contrasted sharply with his dark skin. Emma sat nearby, phone pressed to her ear, speaking in urgent whispers to her editorial contacts. All three looked up as Margaret entered, relief washing over their faces. Jason embraced her with unusual fierceness. "We thought they'd caught you." "They tried." Margaret wasn't ready to explain what had happened with Reed. How could she articulate something she barely understood herself? The bearded man extended his hand. "Dr. Collins, I'm Abram Wilson. I worked with Thomas for 15 years. He spoke of you often." Wilson's office walls were covered with geological surveys and thermal imaging maps, many bearing Thomas's distinctive notations. He had been Thomas's closest collaborator, specializing in geothermal energy systems. If anyone could help them understand the network beneath their feet, it would be him. "Thomas came to me 6 months before he died." Wilson pulled up computer models showing the blue network spanning across continents. He discovered anomalies in geothermal readings, worldwide energy signatures that defied conventional science. When he triangulated the pattern, he found your house at a critical junction point. The government found it first in the 1940s. Emma spread out the Project Echo documents they had salvaged. They called it an energy entity, but couldn't determine whether it was geological, biological, or something else entirely. Wilson nodded gravely. Thomas believed it was all three, a symbiotic relationship between the planet's core energy, crystalline structures in the crust, and primitive biological material. Not alive in the way we understand life, but conscious on some level, capable of response and adaptation. Margaret described her experiences with the blue light, how it had reacted differently to her than to Reed, how it had guided them through solid rock in the cave, how it had ultimately removed Reed from the equation entirely. Wilson seemed unsurprised. Thomas suspected the network might recognize certain genetic markers, might even seek out compatible human interfaces. That's why he kept you away from his research. He was afraid of what Reed might do if he discovered your potential compatibility. Reed mentioned the same thing. Margaret recalled his words at the truck stop. He said Thomas was protecting me, not just from Centron, but from my own potential. Reed wasn't wrong about the network's role in human evolution. Wilson brought up ancient cave paintings showing figures surrounded by blue light. Indigenous cultures worldwide have myths about the Earth's veins, or world roots, that speak wisdom to chosen individuals. Science dismissed these as primitive attempts to explain geological phenomena, but Thomas found correlations between these stories in measurable energy anomalies. "So what does it want?" Jason voiced the question hanging over them all. Thomas believed it was reaching a critical phase. Wilson pulled up Thomas's final research model, a complex simulation showing energy flow increasing throughout the network. The network has phases of dormancy and activity throughout Earth's history. Periods of awakening typically coincide with massive evolutionary leaps or geological restructuring. According to Thomas's calculations, we're entering another such phase. Reed wanted to control this awakening. Emma's voice was tight with urgency. He's been harvesting energy from the network for decades, using it to extend his life, enhance his abilities. But the files suggest he was planning something bigger, a controlled activation of multiple nodes simultaneously. Wilson nodded grimly. A forced evolutionary leap with Reed and his Centron allies as the beneficiaries. But the network isn't a passive resource to be exploited. Thomas believed it was responding to the harvesting by accelerating its natural awakening cycle, essentially treating Reed and Centron as an infection to be addressed. Margaret thought of her house collapsing, the ground breathing beneath it. The storm was no coincidence. The network was already destabilizing the containment structure. Thomas came to the same conclusion. Wilson brought up seismic readings from the days before Thomas's death. He detected a surge in activity across the entire network. He believed a coherence event was imminent, a synchronization of all nodes worldwide. What happens during this coherence event? Jason leaned forward, face illuminated by the computer screen. Thomas wasn't certain. The historical record shows massive geological changes, rapid biological adaptation. Some ancient texts describe it as a time when The world speaks to those who listen. Wilson's eyes met Margaret's. He believed certain people might serve as conduits during the event bridges between human consciousness and whatever intelligence exists within the network. The implications stunned Margaret into silence. Thomas had discovered all this had carried this burden alone to protect her. Yet in doing so, he had denied her choice, her agency, in facing this phenomenon that apparently recognized something in her genetic makeup. Emma's phone buzzed with incoming messages. My editor is running with the Centron story. First pieces hit the web in an hour: corporate misconduct, illegal experiments, environmental violations. But they're hesitant on the bigger claims without more concrete evidence. We need to return to the house site. Margaret felt the decision crystallize within her. Whatever is happening with the network, it's accelerating since the collapse of the containment structure. If Thomas was right about a coherence event, we need to document it, understand it. Centron will have the area locked down. Emma's expression was grim. Private security, probably local law enforcement in their pocket. The property legally belongs to Margaret, Jason pointed out. They can't prevent her from accessing her own land. They won't play by legal rules. Wilson began gathering equipment, sensors, cameras, recording devices. But I have access to university research credentials that might get us past initial checkpoints. We can claim to be investigating the sinkhole as a geological phenomenon. As they prepared to leave, Margaret found herself drawn to a framed photograph on Wilson's desk. Thomas at a conference, arm around Wilson's shoulders, both men beaming with the satisfaction of intellectual discovery. She had taken that photo herself 3 years ago. Thomas had been investigating the network even then, carrying the weight of that knowledge while smiling for her camera. They departed in Wilson's sturdy research vehicle loaded with scientific equipment and the remaining evidence from Project Echo. As they drove toward the nature reserve, the first light of dawn broke across the horizon. The storm had cleared, leaving the world washed clean, the forest vibrant with renewed life. Margaret checked news feeds on her phone. Emma's contacts had moved quickly. Centron's stock was already plummeting as the first exposés hit financial networks. Reports of FBI agents at Centron headquarters scrolled across the screen. The corporate shell Reed had built was cracking, but Margaret knew that was only the surface of a much deeper confrontation. The road to her property was blocked by a checkpoint, private security, wearing Centron logos alongside 2 county sheriff vehicles. Wilson approached confidently, university credentials displayed prominently. University of Northern California Geological Survey Team. Wilson's voice carried the natural authority of a senior academic. We're here to assess the sinkhole formation for potential hazards to the local water table. The guard examined their documentation, expression doubtful. This area is restricted due to ground instability. Centron Energy has been contracted to secure the perimeter. Actually, Margaret leaned forward, this property is registered in my name. I have every right to access it, especially with qualified safety personnel. Recognition flickered in the guard's eyes. He spoke quietly into his radio, then returned with a forced smile. You'll need to stay on the marked paths. The sinkhole is extremely unstable. The permission felt too easy, raising Margaret's suspicions as they drove through the checkpoint. They're watching us. They want to see what we do. Centron's leadership may be in disarray after the expose. Emma monitored news updates on her tablet, and after whatever happened to Reed at the truck stop, they still don't know about the network, not really. Jason scanned the trees lining the road. The public story is about corporate corruption, illegal experiments. The energy entity remains classified. As they rounded the final bend, Margaret gasped. The clearing where her house had stood was transformed. What news reports had described as a sinkhole was actually a perfect circle of disturbed earth approximately 100 feet in diameter. But instead of a depression, the ground had risen slightly, forming a gentle mound. Most striking was the vegetation. New growth covered the mound plants that should have taken months or years to establish, sprouting in vibrant profusion. Wildflowers bloomed in concentric patterns, their colors arranged with impossible precision. Accelerated growth, Wilson approached reverently, instruments already whirring in his hands. The energy release is affecting biological processes. Margaret stepped onto the mound, feeling immediate warmth through her shoes. The sensation was familiar now. A gentle recognition. A welcome. Beneath the surface, she sensed the blue light pulsing stronger than before, no longer contained by Stephen's careful architecture. The readings are off the scale. Wilson stared at his instruments in disbelief. Thermal energy, electromagnetic fields, radiation types that I can't even identify. It's like standing on a biological fusion reactor. Jason set up thermal imaging equipment, capturing the blue network spreading outward from the mound like roots or veins. It's connecting to other nodes. Look at these pathways forming in real time. Margaret knelt, placing her palm flat against the earth. The connection was immediate warmth flowing up her arm, images flickering through her mind. The network spreading awakening nodes illuminating across continents. Stephen standing in the original chamber, communing with the light. Thomas discovering the truth, working frantically to understand the coming coherence. It's showing me things. Margaret's voice sounded distant to her own ears. The network is communicating. Emma approached cautiously. What is it saying? Not words, images, feelings. Margaret struggled to translate the impressions flooding her consciousness. It's been here for millions of years, growing alongside life on Earth. Sometimes dormant, sometimes active. It's concerned. Something is wrong with the harmony, the balance. Wilson's instruments began registering new anomalies, energy spikes radiating outward, then returning like a pulse echo. It's calling to the other nodes, creating a feedback loop. The ground beneath them trembled, not violently, but with purpose, like a body shifting in sleep. Plants swayed without windflowers, turning simultaneously as if following an unseen sun. The air filled with an electric anticipation, the taste of ozone sharp on their tongues. Thomas was right. Wilson checked his readings against a notebook filled with Thomas's calculations. The coherence is beginning. The network is synchronizing. Through her connection with the Earth, Margaret sensed more, the network's awareness expanding, encompassing them, reading their intentions, their histories. It knew them now, recognized them as allies rather than threats. But beyond their small group, she felt other presences approaching minds with darker purpose, harvester energies still seeking to exploit rather than commune. Centron is coming. Margaret pulled her hand away from the ground, breaking the direct connection. Not just security, others like Reed, people who've been using the network's energy. They can feel the coherence beginning. As if summoned by her, warning vehicles appeared on the access road, black SUVs and larger transport trucks bearing Centron logos. Men in tactical gear deployed in practice formation, establishing a perimeter around the mound. Among them walked three figures who moved with unnatural grace, their skin bearing the subtle luminosity Margaret had observed in Reed. The inner circle, Emma filmed discreetly with her phone. Reed's fellow evolved executives. One of them, a severe-looking woman in her 60s with silver hair, pulled tight in a bun, approached with confident authority. Dr. Collins, I'm Eleanor Vance, Chief Science Officer at Centron. I understand you've had some concerning interactions with our former CEO. Former? Jason positioned himself protectively near Margaret. Mr. Reed has been separated from the company. Vance's expression revealed nothing. His methods had become erratic, his judgment compromised. The board has implemented contingency leadership. Margaret noticed the blue veins pulsing beneath Vance's carefully applied makeup, the same telltale sign of network energy integration Reed had displayed. You're here for the node, for the coherence. Surprise flickered across Vance's features, quickly masked by professional composure. We're here to secure a potentially dangerous anomaly, one that our research suggests you have a unique connection to. Your research. Margaret gestured to the armed personnel surrounding them. Is that what you call decades of exploitation? Illegal experiments, using people as lab rats in your integration trials? Evolution requires sacrifice. Vance's voice hardened. Reed understood that even if his methods became excessive, the network is the next stage in human development. Dr. Collins, a bridge between our limited consciousness and something greater. It's not a resource to be harvested. Margaret felt the ground warm beneath her feet, responding to her emotion. It's not here for your corporate advancement or personal immortality. Vance signaled to her security team, who began unloading equipment from the truck's devices that resembled the extraction technology Margaret had seen in the Project Echo files. You have no idea what it wants. Vance's certainty was absolute. We've studied it for generations. The coherence is a natural cycle we've simply learned to accelerate and direct. With our proper interfaces, people like us, like you, we can guide this evolutionary leap. Guide it toward what? Wilson stepped forward, research instruments still gathering data, toward a world where only Centron executives achieve transcendence, where you decide who evolves and who remains behind. Vance's smile was cold. Natural selection has always favored those who adapt first. The security team had finished assembling their equipment, a ring of metal pylons surrounding the mound connected by cables to what looked like industrial generators. Margaret recognized the design from Stevens's original sketches, an energy extraction grid, but scaled up dramatically. You can't contain this. Margaret felt the network's growing awareness, its response to the threat surrounding it. Not anymore. The house was designed by someone who respected what lay beneath, who understood its nature. This crude technology will only provoke it. Containment isn't our goal. Vance nodded to her technicians who began activating the pylons. Communion is. The network recognizes worthy vessels. We're simply providing the proper interface. The pylons hummed to life, emitting a high-pitched whine that made Margaret's teeth ache. Blue energy began flowing from the mound toward the devices captured and channeled through the cables. Vance and her two enhanced colleagues stepped forward, placing their hands on receiving terminals designed to direct the energy into their bodies. Margaret felt the network's pain through her feet, a wrongness, a violation. The natural pulse of energy distorted as it was forcibly redirected. The beautiful pattern of wildflowers began to wither, their vibrant colors fading as the life force was drained from the soil. Stop this! Margaret moved toward the nearest pylon, only to be blocked by armed guards. The first wave must be controlled, directed. Vance's eyes gleamed with fanatical purpose as blue energy crawled up her arms. Once we've established the proper resonance, we'll expand the communion to worthy candidates worldwide. A controlled evolutionary leap. Through her connection to the ground, Margaret sensed the network's response forming not panic or anger, but a deep, deliberate resistance. The energy being harvested was only the surface current, a minor tributary of something vastly more powerful building beneath their feet. Wilson's instruments began registering massive energy fluctuations. The extraction is destabilizing the node. If they continue, a tremor ran through the ground stronger than before. Equipment toppled, and several security personnel lost their footing. The pylons flickered as their power supply fluctuated. In that moment of disruption, Margaret acted. She dropped to her knees, plunging both hands into the soil of the mound. The connection was immediate and overwhelming, the network surging into her awareness with urgent purpose. It showed her the true nature of the coherence, not as something to be controlled or directed, but as a planetary reset, a rebalancing of energies long disturbed by human interference. Vance saw what she was doing and shouted commands to her security team. Stop her! She's interfering with the integration. Guards moved toward Margaret, weapons raised. Jason and Emma placed themselves protectively in front of her, but they were hopelessly outnumbered. The moment stretched into impossible tension, violence seemingly inevitable. Then the ground exhaled. There was no other way to describe it. A collective release, as if the earth itself had been holding its breath and finally let go. The mound beneath Margaret softened, not collapsing, but somehow becoming more permeable. Blue light rose in spiraling columns, not just from the mound, but from dozens of points throughout the surrounding forest. The network was revealing itself, emerging from concealment. The guards froze, weapons forgotten, as they witnessed the impossible. Vance and her enhanced colleagues staggered back from their terminals, the controlled flow of energy now replaced by something shrill and unpredictable. What have you done? Vance's voice trembled between awe and accusation. Not me. Margaret remained kneeling, hands buried in the living earth. It was always going to happen. You just accelerated the timeline with your interference. The spiral columns of light began to pulse in unison, their rhythm matching what Margaret now recognized as the planet's own heartbeat. Through her connection, she felt other nodes awakening worldwide in deserts beneath oceans, under ice caps and mountain ranges. The coherence was spreading at light speed, jumping from node to node, like neurons firing across a global brain. Vance's extraction grid overloaded in spectacular fashion, pylons short-circuiting in cascades of sparks. The enhanced Centron executives convulsed as the energy they had been channeling surged beyond their control. Unlike Reed, they weren't pulled into the earth, but the blue veins beneath their skin faded rapidly. Whatever artificial connection they had established with the network was being severed. It's rejecting them. Wilson watched in scientific fascination, removing its energy from unworthy vessels. Vance collapsed to her knees, sudden age catching up with her as it had with Reed. Decades of artificially halted time rushed forward, lines etching themselves across her face, hair whitening, further joints stiffening visibly. No. Her cry was primal, desperate. We've devoted our lives to this moment. You devoted your lives to exploitation. Margaret felt only pity for the woman crumbling before her. The network doesn't want masters. It doesn't even want worshippers. It wants balance, harmony. Through her earthen connection, Margaret received a flood of impressions, the network's true purpose unfolding in her mind. It wasn't merely an energy source or even a planetary nervous system. It was a regulator, a balancing mechanism that had guided Earth's development for billions of years, nurturing complexity, diversity, interdependence. Its coherence events weren't about advancing a chosen few, but about reestablishing harmony when systems fell too far out of balance. The columns of light intensified, connecting with each other to form a luminous dome over the clearing. Inside this energetic cathedral, Margaret felt her awareness expanding beyond normal perception. She sensed Jason and Emma nearby, their life forces vibrant with potential. She perceived Wilson's scientific curiosity, his mind racing to categorize the unexplainable. Even the Centron personnel registered in her expanded awareness their fear, confusion, and in some cases wonder. Most clearly, she felt the network itself ancient beyond human reckoning, patient yet deliberate. It had observed humanity's development with a perspective that spanned geological ages. It had seen civilizations rise and fall, had witnessed humanity's capacity for both creation and destruction. It had no human emotions, no judgment in terms Margaret understood, yet it had purpose, the perpetuation of life's complex dance, the maintenance of systems that sustain consciousness in all its forms. It's offering a choice. Margaret spoke not just to her companions but to everyone within the dome of light. Not evolution as Centron defined it, physical enhancement, extended life, personal power. Something deeper, a shift in perception in understanding our place within Earth's systems. A consciousness expansion. Wilson's scientific mind struggled to categorize what was happening. A remembering. The words came to Margaret from beyond her own understanding. Humans once knew their connection to these energies, built their sacred sites along the network's pathways, lived in awareness of the planet's rhythms. That knowledge wasn't lost, it was forgotten, buried beneath layers of separation and exploitation. The blue light pulsed more intensely, responding to her articulation of its purpose. Those within the dome felt it differently, some backing away in fear, others moving closer in fascination. Vance and her fellow executives huddled together, their rejected status evident in their rapidly aging bodies and the absence of blue energy beneath their skin. What happens now? Jason approached his mother cautiously, both awed and concerned by her transformation. The coherence continues. Margaret sensed the process unfolding globally. Blue energy rising from nodes on every continent, ancient sites long dormant, reawakening the planetary network, achieving synchronization for the first time in thousands of years. Those who are receptive will feel the connection, will understand their place within the living system. Those who resist will simply continue as before, unaware of the expanded perspective being offered. In Centron Reed's people, Emma gestured to the security forces now retreating toward their vehicles, the extraction equipment abandoned. They sought to control something that can't be controlled. Margaret felt the network's gentle certainty flowing through her. The coherence doesn't punish, but it does correct imbalances. Their artificial integration is being reversed. Whatever extended life they gained through exploitation is returning to natural patterns. Vance must have overheard, for she approached with faltering steps. Her once imposing presence diminished by rapid aging and the loss of her enhanced status. You can't let it end like this. Her voice cracked with desperation. Decades of research, billions invested. The network chose us. No. Margaret's certainty was absolute. You chose the network. You took what wasn't freely given, manipulated what should have been approached with reverence. There's a difference between communion and consumption. As if responding to her words, the blue light intensified around Vance, surrounding her in a gentle cocoon. For a moment, fear crossed her features, then gave way to something like wonder. When the light receded, she stood straighter. Despite her advanced age, her expression transformed from desperate grasping to quiet acceptance. I see now. Vance's voice held new depth, the fanaticism replaced by humility. We misunderstood everything. It was never about advancement or transcendence. It was about reconnection. The dome of light began to shift, pulsing in waves that moved outward from the central mound. Each wave carried information, understanding a planetary language older than words. Margaret felt her own consciousness expanding further, gaining perspective beyond individual concerns. She saw Thomas's place in the unfolding pattern, how his research, his protection of her, even his death, had served the network's reawakening. She glimpsed Stephen's too, his careful containment of the node, an act of preservation, not suppression. Most clearly, she perceived the network's invitation not to control or direct, but to listen, to commune, to serve as interpreter between human consciousness and Earth's deeper awareness. It needs witnesses. Margaret rose to her feet, blue light now visibly flowing through her without the painful integration Reed and Vance had experienced. Not masters, not even servants, just conscious participants who understand what's happening and can translate it for others. Jason touched her arm cautiously, his expression torn between concern and awe. "Mom, are you still you?" Margaret smiled, feeling more herself than ever before. "I'm still me, just with expanded perspective. The network doesn't replace human consciousness. It enhances it, contextualizes it within planetary systems." Wilson's scientific instruments had long since overloaded, but he continued documenting the phenomenon with dogged academic persistence. The coherence doesn't just affect individuals in proximity to nodes. It's creating a cascading awareness shift worldwide. Emma's phone buzzed continuously with incoming messages. Reports coming in from around the world: light phenomena at ancient sites, unusual plant growth, electromagnetic anomalies. Some people are reporting expanded perception, heightened empathy, sudden ecological insights. Others notice nothing at all. Receptivity varies. Margaret sensed the pattern through her connection. Some minds are naturally more open to the awareness shift. Others will come to it gradually or not at all. The network doesn't force communion, it offers it. The dome of blue light began to thin, not disappearing, but becoming less visible as it expanded beyond the clearing into the surrounding forest and beyond. The coherence was achieving stability, settling into a new equilibrium that humans would gradually come to understand over years, perhaps generations. Centron's security forces had largely retreated, leaving their equipment behind. Only Vance and a few others remained, transformed by their brief communion with the network's true nature. The corporate structure built to exploit the energy was already crumbling, its purpose rendered obsolete by understanding what had once seemed merely a resource to be harvested. As the visible manifestation of the coherence faded, Margaret felt her expanded awareness settling into a new normal. The connection maintained but less overwhelming, integrated into her existing consciousness rather than overriding it. She could still sense the network pulsing beneath her feet, still feel its ancient rhythms, but the direct communication receded to a gentle background awareness, like knowing a friend is present without constantly engaging in conversation. What happens to the property now? Jason surveyed the transformed, clearing the mound covered in vibrant new growth, no trace remaining of the house that once stood there. It becomes what Stevens always intended. Margaret felt certainty flowing from her connection to the soil, a sanctuary for the node, a place where the network can exist without interference or exploitation. People will come, Emma gestured to her still buzzing phone. Scientists, seekers, the curious. Once word spreads about what happened here, let them come. Margaret felt no possessiveness about the land. The network doesn't need secrecy anymore. It needs understanding. Wilson gathered his functioning equipment, his academic mind already formulating research proposals. The scientific implications are staggering. We're witnessing a planetary phenomenon that redefines our understanding of consciousness, energy, even life itself. Science will adapt. Margaret smiled at his enthusiasm. New fields will emerge to study what happened here. But some aspects will always resist conventional measurement, conventional understanding. The network operates on principles we're only beginning to comprehend. As afternoon light filtered through the trees, they began the walk back to Wilson's vehicle. Margaret paused at the edge of the clearing, looking back at the mound with its spiral patterns of wildflowers and grasses. The visible blue light had receded, but she knew the energy remained pulsing, aware, alive in its ancient way. Jason joined her, following her gaze. Will you stay here? Become some kind of guardian? Not exactly. Margaret sensed her path forming in the new awareness. The network doesn't need guarding anymore. It needs translation, interpretation. There will be confusion, resistance, attempts to exploit what isn't fully understood. I can help bridge those gaps, explain what I've experienced. Like a scientist, like a witness. Margaret touched a nearby tree, feeling its life force connected to the greater network. Someone who's seen both sides and can speak both languages, human rationality and planetary awareness. Emma approached with her phone. My editors want interviews, exclusive access. This story is global now. Tell them yes. Margaret felt no hesitation. The more people understand what's happened, the more smoothly this transition will unfold. Not everyone will believe or accept, and that's as it should be. Evolution of awareness happens at its own pace for each person. They walked together toward the VR or vehicle, Margaret sensing each person's unique response to the coherence event. Jason's analytical mind was integrating the experience with caution but growing wonder. Emma's journalistic instincts were already framing narratives to help others understand. Wilson's scientific curiosity was boundless, eager to document and classify. And her own response, a deep knowing that had always existed within her, now awakened and expanded through direct communion. As they drove away from the property, Margaret watched the forest through the window. Everywhere she looked, she could now perceive the blue network running beneath the surface, not visibly but in her enhanced awareness. What had once seemed separate systems, geological, biological, atmospheric, now revealed themselves as interconnected aspects of a single living process. The coherence hadn't created new connections. It had simply made visible what had always existed. 1 year later, Margaret stood on the balcony of her new home, a modest cabin built a respectful distance from the sanctuary mound. The property had been designated a scientific research preserve with carefully managed access and strict protocols against exploitation. The Blue Mound had become something of a pilgrimage site, drawing visitors from around the world who sensed the coherence in their own ways. Centron energy no longer existed. In its place had emerged the Earth Systems Foundation, dedicated to research that honored the interconnection of planetary processes. Former Centron scientists who had rejected exploitation now worked alongside indigenous knowledge keepers, ecological researchers, and consciousness scholars in a new field that bridged ancient wisdom and cutting-edge science. Reed had never reappeared after his absorption at the truck stop. Vance, transformed by her brief true communion with the network, had devoted her remaining years to dismantling the exploitation infrastructure she had helped build. The other enhanced executives had experienced similar awakenings. Their artificial longevity reversed, but their understanding expanded. The coherence continued worldwide, subtle but persistent. Some people experienced profound shifts in perception, suddenly understanding their place within Earth's living systems with crystal clarity. Others noticed only strange dreams, unexpected moments of connection with nature, or subtle shifts in priority and perspective. Many noticed nothing at all, their consciousness continuing along familiar patterns, and the network accepted this too patient in its time frame that spanned millennia rather than moments. Jason had established a research center at the university, working with Wilson, to develop new instruments capable of detecting and measuring the energy flows they had witnessed. Emma's reporting had evolved into a globally syndicated series documenting the coherence effects across cultures and ecosystems. Both visited regularly, bringing news of how the world was slowly, unevenly, but inevitably adapting to the new awareness now available to human consciousness. Margaret's role had evolved beyond anything she could have imagined. Her unique connection to the network made her a natural translator between scientific understanding and direct experience. She traveled when needed, speaking to researchers, policymakers, and ordinary people struggling to comprehend the shift. But increasingly, she found herself drawn back to the sanctuary, to quiet communion with the ancient awareness beneath her feet. This evening, she stood alone on her balcony, watching fireflies blink among the trees. Their light reminded her of the network pulsing beneath the surface, natural, rhythmic, alive in its own unique way. She pressed her palm against the wooden railing, feeling the faint resonance of the tree. It had once been still connected to the greater web of life. The house she had purchased for $100 was gone, collapsed into the earth from which it had risen. But the home she had found, her place within the planetary system. her role as witness and translator set remained stronger than any structure of wood and stone. Below the surface, the network continued its ancient pulse, now flowing in harmony rather than resistance. Not speaking in human language, but communicating nonetheless through the language of life itself, the oldest tongue, the first words ever spoken on this spinning sphere of rock and water and wonder. The earth had been speaking all along. Humanity was finally learning to listen.